With the German invasion of the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, in the notorious campaign Operation Barbarossa, the Russian forces called upon all able-bodied men to serve in the defense of the communist state, and many women felt compelled to join their countrymen in the fight on the front. Even though they had first been rebuffed, the need for soldiers transcended sex, and women soon joined up to serve in the Red Army against the Nazis. In the many roles women would have throughout the Second World War on both sides of the conflict, from espionage to nursing, to communications officers, the opportunity to be on the front lines as combatants was exclusively available in the Russian military. On the Eastern Front, Russian women served as snipers, machine gunners, and tank drivers. But one group became renowned throughout the Soviet military, known for their fearlessness and resolve in the face of a brutal enemy. These women would terrorize the German army and help turn the tide of the war for the Allies, aiding in the European victory over the Nazis. Welcome to History Decoded, and today, we look at the remarkable female Soviet pilots known as the Night Witches and the daring missions they undertook to fight the Nazis on the Eastern Front, the foundation of the 588th Night Bombers. The Eastern Front of the European theater of World War II is still remembered as one of the most brutal regions of any war, where millions of Russians and Germans perished. Starvation, a lack of supplies, persistent violence, freezing weather conditions, unforgiving environment, and relentless assaults by the Russians would wear down the Nazi efforts and force a retreat after the remaining Germans surrendered to the Red Army after their defeat on February 2, 1943, at the Battle of Stalingrad. The Red Army would pursue the Germans and force them to fight in Eastern Europe, keeping them on the defense as they fled back towards Germany. One major contributing factor to the Russian victory on the Eastern Front was the use of unconventional warfare, due to their lack of military technology and advancements compared to their Western enemies and allies, such as using daring female pilots. Despite that many of the women were permitted to join the Soviet military, they were, at first, not allowed to fight on the front. By the time the Germans had invaded and begun vicious assaults on the Russian people and countryside, the Red Army needed all the combatants they could find to fight. Even though many of the female volunteers faced discrimination and harassment from their male counterparts, it is estimated over 80,000 women fought for the Russians in a variety of essential military roles, such as nurses, intelligence officers, and auxiliary services, while others would change the face of armies forever by fighting on the front lines. It was here where some women served as snipers, tank drivers, artillerymen, and aviators. The most famous pilots in the Soviet military were part of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, later becoming the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Red Banner and Order of the Suvorov Regiment, an all-female division that would devastate German posts, patrols, and morale. Founded on October 8, 1941, 3 aeronautics regiments were created to allow women to take part in the aerial assault of German positions in the Russian countryside after Colonel Mariya Smirnova, the first female navigator in the Russian army and a celebrated pilot in her own right, had convinced General Secretary of the Communist Party Joseph Stalin to commission women in their aerial forces. Although 2 of the 3 branches, the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment and the 587th Bomber Aviation Regiments, would later allow men to serve in their squadrons as bombers and support crew, only the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment remained a female-only brigade throughout World War II. While thousands of women volunteered, approximately 400 women were selected to serve in each of the 3 newly formed regiments and were sent to be trained as pilots and maintenance crews at the Ingalls School of Aviation. There, over the course of only a few months, they were instructed in navigation, piloting, and aircraft maintenance, all skills that takes years to master, and while enduring a variety of abuses including sexism, harassment, and disparaging remarks from their male comrades. The women were trained to fly Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes from the 1920s, which were predominantly rickety crop dusters and were not only technologically decades old, but in incredibly poor condition when compared to the aircraft being flown by the Luftwaffe, such as the Messerschmitt Me-264 or the Junkers Ju-87. Even with these setbacks and difficulties, these young women, all between the ages of 17 and 25, refused to give in to the pressure and focused on combating the Nazis. The sound of brooms. How it worked. The women of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment had a very specific and unique way of engaging with the German troops, and because of their unstable aircraft, it required daring aviators to pilot and navigate over the Nazi positions. Because of the slow and unstable nature of the plane, the aircraft had to be flown low, much lower than what would have been done by jets, with some reports of the 588th being so close to the ground that they could brush helmets off of the heads of targets. The objectives for the 588th Regiment were simple: frighten and confuse the enemy. persistent attacks were necessary to keep the Germans guessing when and where the attacks would come, which made it even harder to defend or counterattack. For the 588th Regiment, a navigator and a pilot would be assigned to a single aircraft and would depart the base in a squadron of 3, with a total of 6 women. They would be sent out on engagements in the middle of the night, each plane carrying 1 to 2 bombs. The first 2 aircraft would fly by the German positions to draw out enemy fire and spotlights, zooming by and then splitting off in opposite directions to divide the Nazi forces' attention on them. The third pilot would cut their engine before contact, so they would silently glide over the German location without being seen or heard and then drop one of their bombs on the Germans below, who were focused on taking out the first 2 planes. The women would then circle back and regroup, switching who flew first or last until all 3 had dropped their bombs on the Germans or had been shot down. The survivors would then fly back to their base to restock on bombs to fly out again, refuel, or to repair their aircraft. The rattling nose of the biplanes were infamous, and the soft whooshing sound of the third aircraft would terrify the Germans, who could not see the Russian planes until they were overhead. The Germans on the ground likened the sound of a gliding crop duster to that of sweeping brooms, or what a witch might sound like flying on a broom. The noise resonated with the Wehrmacht, scaring them as they could not see what was overhead or what was happening until it was too late. The soldiers began calling these bombers the Nachthexen, or the Night Witches. Some of the women who piloted over German positions would cackle once they had bombarded the enemy, only adding to the Night Witch infamy. This prospect of how the Night Witches bombed the Germans was terrifying, as not all aircraft turned back on once the pilot tried to restart the engine. Being low to the ground meant they could be shot out of the sky relatively easily by machine gun or anti-aircraft fire, or lose control of an escape in their precarious aircraft should it suffer any malfunction or damage. There were no parachutes or protection from the weather or from enemy defenses, and they only had pencils, compasses, maps, stopwatches, and flashlights to guide them in the dark. Also, there were little to no defensive measures for the Night Witches to protect themselves when engaging with the enemy, often only carrying a pistol. More often than not, if the women had survived being shot down, they would use their pistol to shoot at the incoming German soldiers until only 1 bullet remained, and the Night Witches would kill themselves to avoid capture. Aside from it being seen as dishonorable to be apprehended by the enemy in battle, the treatment of Soviet POWs by the Nazis was infamous, and the women who were captured by the Germans faced a terrible fate that included imprisonment, torture, sexual abuse, and death. To commit suicide was a far preferable end for many of the Night Witches after being shot down. Although far more technologically advanced and adept for combat than the Soviet forces, the Germans were harassed nightly by the Night Witches, and they found it difficult to fight them or endure their attacks. The speed of their attacks and the accuracy of the pilots led to rumors among the Germans of the women having perfect night vision like cats. But even without great equipment and power compared to the German aircraft, the Night Witches haunted the German Eastern Front. They would carry out multiple sorties a night, on average between 8 to 18 bombings of German positions for 30 to 50 minutes per attack. This constant barrage wore down the Germans, and even as they retreated west, there was no end to the Night Witches' fury. The witches who led the night attacks, the women who fought, and the cost of war. Who were some of the brave women who served in the 588th Night Bomber Regiment? There are many women who served in the Red Army during World War II, but only a few flew as Night Witches. Flight Commander Lieutenant Irina Sebrova was one of the most accomplished members of the Night Witches, flying the most sorties of her regiment. She completed 1,008 bombings of German positions between 1942 and 1945 and had fought throughout the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and helped bomb Germany during the last months of the war. Squad leader Major Mariya Smirnova was a squadron commander in the 588th and was the first of the Night Witches to carry out 500 sorties at the end of September in 1943. She was one of the first 2 women, along with fellow Night Witch Guard Major Yevdokia Nikolina, to receive the Order of Alexander Nevsky for her service in the defense of Russia. Colonel Nadezhda Popova famously flew 18 sorties in one night with her navigator Lieutenant Yekaterina Ryabova, and by the end of the war she completed 737 missions. Ryabova carried out 890 night missions with the Night Witches, first serving as Smirnova's and then Sebrova's navigator. Major Natalia Mechlin would go on to fly 980 missions of her own, helped to shell German positions in Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, and Germany between 1942 and 1945. These are only a handful of the Night Witches, but were prevalent examples of the persistent efforts these women accomplished to defend the Soviet Union. The Night Witches' determination and resolve allowed them to harass the Germans with great success. By bombing the German line every night, the Wehrmacht struggled to sleep and recover from the barrage, from the brutal daily assaults by the Red Army, followed by the seemingly endless bombings by the Night Witches. The Germans struggled to keep up morale or focus on their conflict with the Soviets. Between June of 1942 to the end of the war in the fall of 1945, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment flew at least 23,672 combat sorties, dropping over 26,000 incendiary shells and 3,000 tons of bombs, stretching from the Russian front to the German countryside. Attacks were recorded throughout Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, Crimea, Belarus, Poland, and Germany, and helped the Soviets turn the tide of the war for the Allied victory. Aside from bombing the front line of the German offense, over the course of the war, the Night Witches ran 155 supply drops, delivering food, medical equipment, and ammunition to the Soviet military on the front. These brave women also destroyed and/or damaged 9 railroads, 17 bridges and other river crossings, 86 firing positions, 12 fuel depots, 176 armored cars, 11 searchlights, and 2 railway stations during the course of the war. It came with a cost, however, with 32 Night Witches, including Colonel Ruskova, killed in action, and numerous others injured in the conflict. That said, 24 women of the 588th received the title of Heroes of the Soviet Union, including Ruskova, Nikulina, Ryabova, Mechlin, Popova, Sebrova, and Smirnova, and are remembered for their bravery and fortitude in the Second World War. Without the trailblazing and risky efforts of the Night Witches, the Russian front could have lasted significantly longer than it did, and in the end helped to alter the face of the Second World War for good. These brave women had become not only a vital asset for the Soviet army, but a necessary force to help defeat the Germans and challenge the perception of what women can do on the battlefield when a nation is under threat. Thank you for watching The Night Witches, the female Soviet aviators who terrorized the Nazis on the Eastern Front, here on History Decoded. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload. Feel free to leave a comment below about other topics we should cover. Thank you again, and until next time, this is History Decoded.